E41 Marketplace Ministries. It's all about your business, and it's all about our Father's business. It's ministry outside the box. No matter what your role is in the business world, E41 Ministries is a special place where we can walk worthy of the vocation wherewith we are called, just as Ephesians 4:1 commands us. In today's busy and frenetic world, it's a blessing to know that God has a plan to bring hope, comfort, and peace through Marketplace Ministry. The E41 Marketplace Ministry of the Fellowship. It's a kingdom-building business. Hi, I'm Kerry Fink with E41 TV. E41 TV is part of E41 Marketplace Ministries, which is part of the Fellowship. And E41, if you're not aware, it comes from Ephesians 4:1. It's the verse that speaks about walking worthy according to the vocation to which we're called. And so I'm Kerry Fink, and I'm very pleased to host this program on behalf of Dave Robinson, who's sort of the founder of E41. Dave has always had a marketplace ministry calling. In fact, this has been a passion of his for many years, that we try to do two things through this program. For people who are working full-time in ministry, how do we, through our churches, our missions, our organizations, how do we best empower the people that are connected to our ministry, the people who come to the services, the people who support the organizations? How do we best empower and enable them to go out into the marketplace and be effective with the things that they're learning and growing with through the experience of interacting with us? So they come to church on Sunday morning for a few hours or maybe even the whole day, but how do they carry that back in and be effective at evangelizing in the marketplace on a Monday through Friday basis? Or Monday through Saturday, as the case would be. And also the other side of this would be that when you are a person who may not necessarily be full-time working at the church, but still have that call, you're in the marketplace, you're a Christian in the marketplace, and how do you deal with all the ramifications of living in a politically correct world where sometimes it can be very, very difficult to express your faith because it's not always a friendly environment within which to do that. So those are the kind of things that we're going to tackle today. And we're here on location in Reston, Virginia. We're at the Fellowship One Conference, and we've been having a great time here because we've had some amazing speakers, some amazing services, meeting amazing people. The Fellowship is just a great place to grow and just as the name says, fellowship. And one of the great folks that's here that we're really privileged to have with us today is Michael Cole from Christ for the Nations. And you, just like the Fellowship, are also in the greater Dallas area. So welcome.
Thank you, Kerry.
It's good to have you here, and really, really pleased to have, because Christ for the Nations has had such an impact of raising up generations now of leaders, who carry forth the gospel. Let's start with you though for just a minute. Tell us a little bit about your background and how you came to Christ for the Nations.
Well, my background, I grew up in Ohio, and so I'm kind of a transplant to the Dallas area, a very different culture for me. But my background, basically, I grew up in a mainline denomination. I didn't really understand the terms born again and that type of thing. But in my college years, I got radically saved. And my mother-in-law, actually, we worked in the same department store. Mm-hmm. And so she had a great influence in my life. And I was introduced to what it meant to be a Pentecostal. And it really, rocked my world at that time. And so I really got planted at that point. In fact, my mother and father all planted a church.
Okay.
And it was in 1984. And so we got involved in the plant of that church. We were very involved in the ministry of the church for 23 years in various areas, including senior pastor. Mm-hmm. So for the last 7 years that we were in Ohio, we were pastoring the church. And I went to Christ for the Nations actually as a student during that time, which is very unusual. Mm-hmm. But my son was attending Christ for the Nations, and I went to visit him. And I'll never forget going there and sitting in what they call the Institute building, the IB, and hearing the speaker. And as a pastor, I'm thinking, so applicable. I can take what I'm hearing and I could take it and apply it right in the setting I'm in. And I felt the Spirit of the Lord, what I call, put a burning seed in my heart, and that I'm supposed to come and be trained here.
Wow.
Now I'm thinking down the road, 5-10 years, my father-in-law's with me, and when God says something, he's like, let's do it. So he's like, you need to make plans to go.
Wow.
And so we made a very radical decision in obedience to what we felt the Holy Spirit was speaking. And I attended the major at the time called Leadership and Pastoral. And my wife and I, we kind of flew back and forth, but I took that 9 months to attend Christ for the Nations. And upon graduation, I was implementing a lot of the things I had learned in the church, but I would make trips back to Dallas because we were recruiting students.
Right.
We had the privilege of having several students that were international, one from Malaysia, one from South Korea, kind of joined staff with us. And it just opened up our world to the many cultures. But on one of my trips, I was asked if we would consider relocating to Dallas and becoming part of Christ for the Nations and helping to really launch a more structured placement department. Well, it really wasn't in our mind at the time.
Right.
And so we really had to spend some time, and God confirmed it in only ways that he can. And so we knew we were relocating to Dallas. Good. So in 2007, we moved to Dallas and we began operating in that area of graduate placement.
Well, it's a phenomenal and a very important part of all of it. And as we started to talk about before the cameras were rolling, in addition to equipping people as they move out into ministry, you've also found that many people that you're working with have a strong call into the marketplace as well to do marketplace ministry. And it's kind of funny how we see this pattern emerging that God is calling people into this. Maybe you would even say it's almost a radical way of thinking, although it's actually a very biblical way of thinking, because when you go back to the Bible, Jesus spent more time in the marketplace, it seems like, than necessarily. In fact, often he was more interested and concerned with, it seemed like, reaching people who were the unchurched, if you will. Absolutely. So tell me a little bit about how you've seen that shift come over these years and how you guys are planning on addressing all of that.
Okay, that's a very good question. Well, first of all, just a little background in my life. I spent most of my time in the marketplace in the industry of office equipment. So we worked with copiers and computers and things like that. And back in that day, the thought of taking a copier and making it talk to a computer was a new thing. Yes. And nowadays, they're all printers. But back in that day, it was very, very new technology and thoughts. But about 15 years I spent in management, in the service industry. Wow. And I guess my perspective was different because my father-in-law was my pastor. Right. And I kind of came into the kingdom of God thinking like when you're born again, you're saved, and you're called. So I felt like I was in full-time ministry as a Christian. So I guess during those 15 years, I never felt like I was limited in any way. I remember many times for lunch, just taking a lunch with me, sitting in my vehicle and praying, saying, God, who can I minister to, and who would you send to me? And I would go to parks and different things and just sit, because I traveled a lot in my job, and God would open up opportunities for me to just, approach a stranger, talk to him about Christ. And it was just a wonderful opportunity. And to me, it was very adventurous, very exciting, but I guess I never saw myself as not a minister.
It's an interesting point. Dave makes this comment. I think he shared it when we were having the session. We had a breakout session here for E41 Marketplace Ministries, very well attended. And what they said was, one of the statistics he quoted was 1 out of 5 Americans actually goes to church regularly, whereas it's 9 out of 10 Americans are in the marketplace. So it's pretty amazing to hear you talk about that you had recognized the importance of being there and how you ask God to use you in those particular cases.
I think the difficult part is if you don't see yourself as a minister, you'll never act on it, and you'll never behave that way. Now, what I've seen at Christ for the Nations, which, and a lot of people may not know this, but Christ for the Nations co-founder was Gordon and Frida Lindsay. And Gordon Lindsay was also the first president of the fellowship. Right. And so the same foundations and same roots were laid. But many people have come to Christ for the Nations, and it's a Bible institute, and the majors are basically church ministry. But when I attended the leadership and pastoral major, I would say 60% of the class, and I'm thinking on a regular basis, were not called to church ministry. They were not called to be pastors or associate pastors or any role on staff, but they felt a call to be leaders and to influence in their spheres. And so many times speakers would come in, and the assumption was this class is called to be pastors in the church. And so they would ask, for a raise of hands and things. And they were always amazed to see so little hands. But the problem was there was nothing to address that as far as how do we affirm and be intentional about training people for marketplace ministry and helping to create that biblical understanding and worldview that you are an ambassador and you're no less a minister than someone called to serve in the church. In fact, in many ways, have much more opportunity for ministry. And I believe the Great Commissions to everyone, every Christian is called to make disciples. And that is something that you carry with you in whatever segment of society you're in.
What you're saying is so critical and important in the fact that many people, and this is one of the things that Dave speaks about a lot. He travels 250 plus days a year, working with churches and organizations. And one of the things that he's always explaining about is the importance that as pastors and leaders in churches who are really, that's their full time, that's where their focus is at, that it's very easy to obtain an attitude that, well, the people outside are coming in to help support the ministry and the mission of the church. Whereas Dave likes to challenge them and say, what we really want to think about is that we're bringing the people in to train them, equip them so we can push them back out into the marketplace and have them be effective. So it's really interesting that you sort of represent this interesting balance of both worlds. You had all the experience and knowledge and success of working in the marketplace per se, like you mentioned with office equipment. And then at the same time, you have all the exposure and calling and knowledge on the evangelical side as well, being a pastor. As you look at those things, how do you, when you're ministering to the people in your church and in those days, how would you encourage them to activate their faith in the marketplace?
I think the one thing I would do is, because if I look back and I say, where was I limited in how my perspective, I still, to me, felt like, even though I felt like I was a minister in the marketplace, I never heard that terminology, but I felt like the ultimate thing was to be called to serve in the church. So to me, it was almost like I didn't see myself as not being a minister, not being effective, but in the same sense, it's like to go into the church and to serve as a pastor or somebody placing staff, that was like the ultimate. And that would be the one thing I would really try to reinforce is that, you serve in the vocation where you're called.
Right.
And God puts calling on people's lives to serve in that ministry. And that
Absolutely.
Is the ultimate.
Absolutely.
That is the place of effectiveness and gifting that God has put them in. And I think that many people have that same thought, that they see themselves as not true ministers or subpar, or they don't have quite the spiritual level.
Right.
And I think that that's definitely not something supported by Scripture.
Right.
And I have been blessed to see people in the marketplace come into Christ for the Nations. In fact, we had a gentleman that's a businessman, and recently he came to Christ for the Nations to visit. Now, he had helped with donations and but been very successful in the business area. But he came into a class, and he was able to participate in the class and pray for students to receive the baptism of the Holy Spirit.
Wow!
And as a marketplace minister, as a businessman, to see him operate in that area with such confidence and just natural gifting.
Yes,
and that I think we should reinforce more and more.
Well, do you think I think there's probably a lot of fear that keeps people who are in the congregation or people who are in the marketplace, but Christians, because they're always afraid, well, I say the wrong thing or I'm going to offend somebody, because, we sort of say, it's amazing that you can really get in trouble with the word Jesus in the marketplace. it doesn't really make sense it would be that way. So I think it's so important that you guys are creating now and looking at means of setting up programs that really facilitate that side. And I guess part of it is going to be to overcome those kind of objections or those kind of, I guess, fear, like, is it okay if I say this, kind of thing.
I agree. I think to me, and part of the marketplace training, to somebody, I think the greatest thing that we're told will not fail is love.
Yeah.
And I remember a book that John Maxwell wrote, and forgive me if I get the title wrong, but I think it's Everyone Communicates, but Few Connect. It's something like that. But the premise of the book is that if you're going to connect with an audience or with the people you're speaking to, what makes you connect is that you love who you're speaking to. And I know that, when you look at different speakers, it's sometimes those are the ones you connect to when you know that they really love who they're talking to.
Right.
And I think people can discern that.
Right.
And in the marketplace, it's the same thing. I mean, basic issues of trust and those, basic elements of relationship, people discern. And when they know that you really care about them and you're not trying to manipulate them or that type of thing, I think they're more open to hear what you have to say.
Absolutely.
And that is such a wonderful area because how much of our lives do we spend in the marketplace?
That's right.
Compared to in the church.
Right.
And that's why the relationships I had, I still remember my first day as a manager. I never forget. We did training out of the area. So like we would send people to school in different cities. And on my first day, I had a young man that was sent to Chicago. And I got a phone call saying that he never showed up. And what happened was that he basically had an addiction issue to cocaine.
Oh, goodness.
And so he had ended up admitting himself to rehab. And that was my first day on the job. And so I had to deal with that situation
right away.
But bottom line is I was appointed to be his counselor.
Okay.
As far as work.
Right.
And so as a manager, I got to pray with him actually and to talk with him about some of those things. And so I think that many times we fail to see the opportunity in the marketplace to effectively minister and get involved in people's lives and bring them hope.
Yeah, and I think it's the greatest, if you want to talk about a mission field, people are always talking about mission trips. And really, to some extent, the mission trip could be going into the office, the factory, the school, the government office, whatever it is. And one of the things I think also is Dave talks a lot about, people spend so much time, they're either in business, they're in education, or they're in government. And all three of these areas are so influential that it should be, followers of Christ who are really in key positions in those kind of things. Yeah. And I think that may be part of what Christ for the Nations has in mind too, as you guys are looking at really establishing. I know you were telling me that you're working on some degree programs and things like that. Tell us a little bit about what we can be looking for over the next few months, years, as you guys really move forward in this area. Okay.
Well, one thing I'm amazed at is the diversity at Christ for the Nations. At the moment, we actually have the chair Senate, so the chair senator of Bermuda attending classes.
Wow.
She's, I think this is she's been there 2 years. She's into her third year. But it's never amazed. It's amazed me the type of people God brings there.
Yes.
But I think at Christ for the Nations, we're beginning to see the need to be more intentional about offering training in these areas. So a little over a year ago, we started a Marketplace major, which is a big shift.
That's a huge
thing. We've never done that before. We've got majors in missions and New Testament leadership. We have youth, children and family ministry, worship and technical arts. But now launching a Marketplace major has just been amazing and opened up the doors. We talk about kingdom influence, kingdom ethics, entrepreneurship, finances and economics. But just a very general idea. But those are things right now that are, people are coming on to take classes on campus, but also we're going to be offering them online. We're going to be offering evening and weekend classes in that area too. But as a placement director, one of the things, again, that I had said is going to Christ for the Nations is, to me, it's a very pragmatic school.
Yes.
And that's what attracted me. And I think that's what attracts a lot of people. So I'm wanting to develop some programs that as people come looking at the Marketplace major, that they will be able to do internships in different segments of society, semester long, some summer long, and even offer some postgraduate study programs that would be, I would call apprenticeships. And so we could do it
it's wonderful. What kind of people would you be looking for as you think about that and as you're developing these programs? Who would be like the ideal student that might say, this is something I want to track with, I want to find out more about?
Well, because we don't actually have the major in that, like if they're called in accounting or education, things like that, we don't offer training in those areas. But many times what we find is someone that already has a degree in that area, but has never had training in ministry per se.
You're going to bridge the gap between kind of the professional aspect of that and the ministry aspect of
Absolutely.
that. Okay.
Absolutely. And to me, Christ for the Nations is very, very good for that. So many people who've got that training and maybe even already in that segment of industry, they would come to Christ for the Nations for that 1 year.
Right.
And one of the things we like to say is that you receive more impartation there than being solely focused on academics. And so the faculty are very, very involved with the students. So there is access to them. There's mentoring. So very relational in that aspect. And so I think people come there for that reason, and they want to have influence in the area that God's called them in. So that type of person is really who we're looking for. Sometimes we'll see them, coming right out of high school. But I think in that major, we're going to find more people who've been established in an area, but really never were trained, in a ministry practical aspect of how do I exert influence, and how do I, walk righteously in that area, Because I know I've been in sales, and one of the areas that they talk about is how do you not manipulate, in order to gain profit. And so I learned that people buy from people. And
Absolutely,
so trust isn't a very strong issue there, but those are the practical things they talk about. So. To me, I think it's a very broad target, market there.
No, that's great. Well, I know we were talking, and I actually wrote it down because I didn't want to lose it. The website for Christ for the Nations is cfni.org, cfni.org. The initials Christ for the Nations. .org. Now, and I said also, since all this is sort of coming online, even while we're speaking, if somebody has an interest and they would like to learn more, would you recommend they give you guys a call? What's the best route for somebody to take another step on this?
Well, I think the first thing that I would encourage you to do if you're interested in, attending Christ for the Nations, you can go online and there's some video on there from the Marketplace director to kind of hear the heart, hear a little bit more about the courses.
Wonderful.
But the other thing is we have what we call campus days.
Okay.
And so every semester you can come onto the campus and you can actually, you would stay there and attend classes and get a taste for what it's like there.
Okay.
That's the best way to really understand, what you'd be experiencing. You're more than welcome to, not just visit the website, but call admissions. And if you have any specific questions about how to the enrollment process. But I would encourage you to come on and take a tour of the campus, sit on that. And of course, the worship at Christ for the Nations is, of course, I'm biased, but there's nothing like it. And starting every morning with chapel and being in the presence of the Lord is a wonderful experience.
It's the right way to do it. Well, and I know one of the things is as E41 continues to develop and grow, there's so much that's important. There's so much important. I know it's the overused word of synergy, but you can really feel God weaving all these paths together in a way, because I think we had somebody yesterday say, the field is ripe for the harvest. I mean, this is an opportunity to put hope in a dark place where so many people are forced into a position where, because we haven't had prayer in schools for so many years, and this whole thing about you may be the only Jesus they ever see is so true. And now there's an opportunity for us to train and equip and really move people out into the marketplace where they can really show that they can be excellent workers in their chosen vocation. But at the same time, they are really fulfilling God's call in their life because they're also ministering right there. To me, it seems like an ideal place to be. We have basically a minute left. I'd like to ask you just to sum up, maybe a thought. If you would look in the camera and say to somebody who's watching this, and kind of say, you've been both sides. What would be a word of wisdom that you might say, think about this. If you're working, here's some things to think about as you walk your call out.
Well, that's a good question. And in my role as placement director, I'm always working with people in transition, and it's a very, very difficult place to be. And one of my favorite scriptures, that's an interesting one, but it says, if man's goings are of the Lord, how then can a man understand his own pathway? Mm-hmm. And I remember the president of the fellowship, Gene Evans, one time said, every major move I've made in my life was unplanned. Mm-hmm. And so I believe that the leading of the Holy Spirit is the key, mm-hmm. To being successful and being the most influential that you can be in your calling. But God, the best place to be is where he leads you to. And Christ for the Nations for me was a turning point in my life, because I believe that it helped me to hear the voice of the Lord more clearly and step into what he had for me. Because sometimes it wasn't what I saw. It wasn't what I thought it was going to be. But where I'm positioned right now, I see it's the hand of God.
Absolutely.
There's nothing like being in that sweet spot. And so I encourage you that if that's you're at a point of transition, or maybe you just feel like you're in a marketplace role and you're not really sure how you see that working long term, come to Christ for the Nations and take some marketplace classes, and I think you'll be able to hear the voice of God and really establish you in what he's got, your destiny.
Oh, that's good. That's good. Well, thank you, Michael, for joining us today.
My pleasure.
It's been a great talk, and I really appreciate you making the time. I know there's lots of things going on here,
yes.
And just to find a hole in the schedule to join us, I appreciate that. Thanks for joining us too. We appreciate your time and interest in E41 TV. And as you go out into the marketplace and minister, may God bless you. Thank you for joining us.